Hello and welcome to my live stream on Sunday, August 30th. Today we're going to talk more about a young woman's impression of heaven. Very exciting. We're now going to talk about clarifications. Last week we talked about the stories of three of her friends and what Patricia had said, who was the young spirit who had passed over at the young age of 19 to the spirit world. Her family was a spiritist family, to give you some background of her. She went to the colony San Sebastian. This was all psychographed by her. Actually, it was delivered to a medium who psychography being the writing when a medium gets a message and audible message or into their brain where they have thoughts where they can write down a whole story or message. And of course, the great medium Chico Xavier was very famous for psychographing. According now, over 500 books, many of them after his death, as they brought together his writings and his messages for different people. But before I begin, please subscribe, hit the like button, give me some comments, let me know what you think, and we will do what we can and tell everybody what we do on this channel so we can spread Spiritism. I'm also putting a link out here if you want to talk to me. Use this for live messages if you're on Facebook. Okay, let's start. So, we are now talking about chapter 12, clarifying what happens after death. And I believe this is a very exciting chapter, which is going to tell us more about what happens when people pass over in the spirit world. So, I'll start. So Patricia wrote, Masurio, who's a friend of Patricia, caught me sitting in the veranda deep in thought. And he asked, what is little Patricia thinking about so hard? And Patricia said, I told him the personal stories I have heard from three friends and asked him afterward, Mauricio, why didn't I go to the learning center? So what she's meant is that three of her friends, when they died and they were helped from their death, some of them spent some time in the lower zone, went to the learning center first. Patricia went right to her grandmother's house. And Mauricio said, well, it's good that you're thinking and meditating. That's how you learn. You're very mature for your 19 years. You're more responsible than many older people here are. So we thought it would be better for you to come here directly. You have a lot of knowledge already, so the center would be more like a preschool for you. Then Patricia said, does one suffer when passing over without knowing about life in the spiritual plane? And the answer was, not everyone suffers for not knowing about Spiritism or the spiritual plane. Knowledge only makes the adjustment easier. Lack of knowledge about the continuation of life after death of the body is the cause of much disturbance and suffering. And it's no different for the incarnates who have lost a loved one. So let's talk about that for a second. So this is why I wrote my books and I put articles on my blog and I put, videos on YouTube, is for people to understand that we're not just a carbon-based life form on Earth that is born, goes through chaotic experiences that are seemingly random, right? And then we die and we dissipate back into the ground, to the earth. No. And I think people have a divine hint that this is true. This is, of course, why when you're born, you have your conscience and your instinct. And your instinct, you have an instinct to look for and to increase your spirituality. Now, many people push that down and don't want to use that. But it's there, and it usually catches up to us at one point or another, and either we open the door and let it in, or we don't. And it's all up to your free will and your choices. It doesn't, it's not any total harm, because whatever choices you make in this life, you can always rectify any mistakes you think you've done in the next life. But increasing your spirituality and understanding about the continuation of life, as Mauricio puts it, is a great help, because when I have been in part, I'm not a medium, but I've been sat in the back row against the wall in mediums meetings. There have been very many people, spirits, who have talked through mediums, and they still don't really understand, are they alive or not? And this is very important for people to understand, is that you are a immortal soul and you continue on. And it's very disheartening for these spirits to come and say, I don't know what's going on. People aren't talking to me. People, I talk to them and they don't answer back. And this is why they don't understand, because they feel that they are alive, because they feel density. They feel, they feel their body, which is really, that is the paraspirit, which is an ethereal body, which is lighter and less dense than your human body. And you're on a vibrational plane, or dimension, as you may want to call it, where, as a human, doesn't have the range of eyesight or hearing or the senses to understand that you are there before them. They don't see you, whereas you see a denser person on that plane, and you see other spirits around you. And you also see the paths up to heaven. You see more than just the sky. You see the spirit world around you. And that's why it's important to understand, when that happens, a lot of death comes up to many people by surprise, of course. When that happens, please don't be surprised. That's why it's good for people to kind of increase their own spirituality. So then she goes, what can you tell me about the suffering of these three friends? And he says, well, selfishness is a heavy burden, and those who cultivate materialism become its prisoners. Amelia suffered, but she wasn't bad. She just neglected to do good deeds. She neglected to be good to herself, to educate herself, to be able to understand life as a whole. There were faults in her personality she didn't try to correct. So passing over was a nightmarish experience, an agony. What happened to her happens to many people. They're the ones who forget about the spiritual world completely. Now, talk about Amelia. She spent some time in the lower zone, and she wasn't a bad person, but she just did not at all question a spiritual existence, a spirituality, that there was a higher power. Now, quite, true is, if I had died probably at the young age that Amelia did, I think she was in her 20s, I think she said in the last chapter, I would have been the same way. I had not, I believed in a God, but I had not thought of my spirituality. I was completely preoccupied with materiality. I wanted my car. I wanted things. I wanted to be with my friends. All those type of things. I wanted to please myself, of course. And so I think it's important that we, at whatever age we are, we try and take a step back and give a little bit of our time to educate ourselves. Now, why is that important? Why can't we just live life, not worry about it? And then, okay, we're a little confused when we die, but we'll get over it and we'll be fine. It's a very fair question that I have been asked by several people. Well, I guess the answer lies into what you want for yourself. If you want to be successful and ascend in the spirit world, meaning that you can go higher and higher and have more freedom of action and more power, spiritual power, to help others, then you want to understand the spirit world, and you want to fashion yourself to be a more mature spirit. And when I say mature spirit, is you want to work on changing out your character and your personality. And when I say changing out, it, as Spirit tells us, you remove the primitive emotions, hate, envy, jealousy, and you replace them with love, fraternity, and charity. And that means working a little bit every day by rewiring your brain. And that is a long-term effort. Believe me, I've been going at it now for years, probably a decade, and I'm still not where I want to be, but I am a lot better. I forgive people very quickly. I don't get upset so fast. I still get upset sometimes, but I'm much better than I was. And that is how you need to do, is you need to rewire your brain to become a more caring, nice, fraternal, charitable person. So now, then he talks about Marina. He goes, Marina suffered for the same reason. It's a mistake to think that youngsters aren't rescued just because they're young. She wasn't ready to face the change that came with passing over. So she rejected it. This is one that died in a car accident, and she was brought, the spirits came to help her, and she said, "Who are you?" And then said, "I'm out of here." And of course, then she went and she kind of hid in a temple for a couple of years because it was safe for the more ignorant spirits outside. And he says, her errors weighed in her conscience. Unfortunately, there are so many delinquent youngsters. Being a child or a young person in the flesh is only a phase, for we know the child spirits may well be millenary, which means an old spirit has been there back and forth and been around for a while. Rescuing crews dedicate most of their attention to children and young ones, but unfortunately, not all can be helped. Many need to learn by suffering in order to appreciate the assistance they receive. Then Mauricio went to the next person. Now, Isa was a good person. She could have been helped and could have felt better passing over, but she believed she's going to stay in her carnal body. Now, Isa was I believe, a Seventh-day Adventist or a Jehovah's Witness. She's one of those people that believe that when she dies, she stays asleep until Jesus calls all the good people up and wakes them up. Because in fact, that was the way she wanted to, and our free will is always respected. Her story is very common. Suffering and despair will torment anyone. There are many young people who go through the same thing. Whenever incarnates feel pity and think of discarnates as sick and suffering, these spirits feel the same way and have more difficulty freeing themselves from the reflexes of their illnesses and of the suffering which caused their passing. Incarnate people should think of discarnate ones as healthy and happy, which I've said before in many programs, wishing them well. Whenever incarnates don't cooperate, the discarnates require a lot of assistance to overcome this difficult phase. They hear people calling them as if their family voices were coming from inside them. They want to answer. They want to be near them. If they cry over there, the discarnate cries over here. Often, that is the only reason they have for being committed to a hospital. Sometimes they accept their passing well and everything is fine. Yet they plunge into a crisis whenever the incarnates call them in desperation. Later, they start asking for favors. Nobody should ask favors of discarnate relatives. One can't know if they are able to answer it. In Isa's case, she became unhappy because she couldn't help them. But even if a spirit can, we can't expect our discarnate relatives to do our homework or take our places during exams. Isa couldn't help herself, even if she could do everything that was asked of her. Even if she had the knowledge and the ability, she would not be able to answer all the requests. It is not a good idea to take care of other people's business. The intervention from the Learning Center in Isa's case was very appropriate. Now, why was that? Why can't she help other people? Why can't she help answer their prayers? And that's a very good point. So the way the spirit world works is all our prayers are answered, but not by untrained and just newly arrived spirits like Isa. In the books by G. Val Owen, there is many passages about how prayers are analyzed and answered. And in fact, there was a description, and I have that in my book, Heaven and Below. And there's a description of this huge facility. And it's got different, it's like 8-sided or 6-sided. And it had, each side was for prayers from a different level of heaven. Now, these were prayers from spirits within heaven, but there's also places of analysis for prayers within earth too. And each side had these prayers coming up, and on the wall there's like pictures of these prayers, but it was like encoded. And as one spirit says, I couldn't really understand the code, but other people could. And if you like touched the prayer was going by, you touched it and you saw who was giving it and what it was for, and then that spirit who was in charge of one wall or whatever would say, okay, this needs to go over here, or I can give it to this person to handle, or this one has to go up further because we can't really answer it. And so for everything is analyzed. That's why when Jesus said, if you pray, you'll get, you will get what you want. Now, that's not get what you want as we know get what you want. It's get what you need in actuality. It's really get what is needed for you to become an advanced and a mature, educated, and loving spirit. So that may mean you ask for a new car. When you ask for something selfish, that's usually like put off to the side and nah, that's not gonna work. But when you ask for strength of purpose and you meditate and you request that angels to help you through your trials and your tribulation with love and understanding, that help will be forthcoming. That is a promise. And if you say, I want to help other people and I want to do good things, that help will be forthcoming. Even if you don't verbalize that prayer. There was a out-of-body experience, or other death experience, I should say, by a person who was at a funeral. And he could hear the person who just died. She was pretty young, died in a car crash. And he could hear her voice as if she was like 3 years old or so. And he was like, why am I hearing this? He goes, are you, and I forgot the name, he goes, yes, I'm it. He goes, why do you sound like you're 3 years old? Because you were thinking of me as 3 years old, but I can sound by any age. Of course, since he talked in different, speeches, and where I said, I could come as my age or an 80-year-old. And of course, he heard her as an 80-year-old. So he goes, well, how come you're talking to me? He goes, you're the only one that could hear me. So to make a long story short, she used him to be able to talk to her mother to resolve certain things that were hanging around, and to tell her mother that she loved her and that she was trying to help her. In fact, she had come to that family. It was a very dysfunctional family, to try and help that family through their problems. But given that, this man said after he retired that he was, with his newfound gift that started from that funeral, he tried to help other people. And he goes, I don't ask for anything, but for some reason, when I need money, the money comes. And when I wrote about that, I actually wrote about that near-death or other death experience. What I said was, in my book, What Happens During NDEs, is that the spirits knew he was doing good. The spirits understood that he was giving to others, and they did not let him want. And therefore, they will, when you do good and when you meditate and you try to increase your spirituality, you shall be helped. That is a certainty. That is a promise by the spirit world that you shall be assisted in your quest for spiritualization. And whenever you're trying to help other people, again, you will be assisted. It may not be as the way you think it is, because they see the past, the present, and the future in a much wider thing. So therefore, you think, well, they're not helping me at all. But certain things could be done that you don't see in the background. And in fact, spirits will say, and have told us that a lot of times they're given orders to help a certain person in a certain way, or do something to a certain person in a certain way. And they don't understand, well, what is this leading to? But then a long time afterwards, I go, oh, that's why. Take, for instance, this pandemic we're going through, and this is 2020. The spirits have told us there's a pandemic has a reason, and you'll find out after it's ended. So very interesting. So things have a reason, and things are allowed. And one of the reasons they did tell us is that what it did is force people into their families and to find some spirituality and love through their families, and to be with each other instead of being out and alone and not communicating with each other. That's one of the benefits. But I hate to say benefits. People have died of the pandemic. And so there are things happening that we don't understand, because, of course, we look at things from a very narrow point of view. We look at things we think of today, tomorrow, next week, next month. But we think a year out, that's pretty far for most of us. So let me carry on with what Mauricio told Patricia. So, note Patricia, he said, even though Isa was good, she still suffered because of her lack of proper understanding of the processes of dying, something very common to most people. And she goes, well, so different with me. And he says, well, you're not privileged. You're here on affinity and because you're pure of heart, not because you used to be a spiritist. If you hadn't been good without major flaws, your passing wouldn't have been as it was. If you, Patricia, hadn't lived an exemplary life, then even if you had been a director of a spiritist center, you wouldn't have come here the way you came. You're here because you deserve it. You didn't feel what Isa felt because the spiritual environment in your home was one of understanding. Everyone there strives for self improvement, an attitude that helps them avoid disturbing you and consequently helps you in the process. Look at your mother. Instead of calling you to be near her, she offers you flowers. She doesn't pick them and take them to the cemetery. Instead, she visualizes them and sends them to you. Your father, accepting the reality of your passing, understood what Jesus said. How long shall I suffer you? And although he misses you, he didn't exactly suffer your loss, suffering instead for those who stay behind and now miss you unreasonably. He gave you encouragement and moral support. So think about that. When you have a loved one who led a good life, an exemplary life, a life full, more full of good things than trivial, mistakes and so on. Think of that person and think of them happily. And I think is what Mauricio said, where her mother visualized flowers and sent to her daughter is a very important thing because thought is action in the spirit world. And those flowers did show up in Patricia's, small little studio apartment. So those are the things to keep in mind. When someone always think positive for them. And even then, if you think, well, they, who knows where they may be? They may be in the lower zone or worse. Give them positive messages and pray for them to be helped by spirit guides and pray for them to open their eyes to see them. Because many in the lower zone, which is this starts around the crust of the earth up to the bottom level of heaven, they don't know what's going on. They don't understand why they're there, or even those below in a type of purgatory are not in a good position. So you should, and also then when superior spirits come, a lot of times, even like their friends will come, but they can't see them because their friends are of a higher spiritual level and therefore they're less dense. And so that even a spirit can not always see other spirits because the higher spirits are even less dense than they are. Of course, we are the most dense, and they cannot detect their presence. And in fact, there are stories, where this one man was wandering through heaven and he goes, I think I'm in heaven, but where are all my friends? And he met this spirit who was sent to meet him. And he says, well, your friends have been here, but you haven't detected them because you're still thinking in black and white. You're still thinking that, only the good go to heaven, or, you're still thinking a little bit wrong. You're not too far off, but you need to be trained a bit so that you can adjust your mind and adjust your outlook. And then you'll be able to see your friends. Your friends were here. They did want to help you, but you could not detect them. So that is what happened. So then Marisol said, and then she wrote, yes, it was true. My father was sustaining me. I received his prayers and messages every day. Patricia, cheer up. Life is beautiful. Be happy. We're fine. This is what her father sent to her. Don't worry about us. Follow the guidance of our friends. He says, I've always obeyed my parents. I used to think and still do that my father was really the best, always prudent and wise. Now I was following his orientation. Then Patricia said, Mauricio, I want to work. And then Mauricio, her spirit friend at that time, and you will, he said, you'll work as soon as you start the course about the spiritual plane. This material is offered in 2 levels, a beginning course for those who have no knowledge and a shorter advanced one for those who already know something. You will take the advanced course. You'll enjoy it, I'm sure. But while you wait, would you like to be busy? Because, well, let's see. What would you like to do? When you passed over, you were in college studying science and mathematics. Here we go. Also teaching kindergarten. Would you like to teach? He goes, teach over here? He goes, yes. Do you think that due to the simple fact of passing over, one knows everything? If a person was illiterate in the physical world, he or she will continue being illiterate here. If in past incarnations one knew, one can't just remember when discarnate, she asks us. Not always. If in previous lives a person was educated but illiterate in the last one, he or she may remember. However, this remembrance may come back with other remembrances that may be undesirable for the person at the present time. Anyway, to bring remembrances back, a person has to be prepared for it. Those who are almost always remembered by themselves. Discarnate spirits remember the past only to get a better understanding to learn or do a task. Those who need to remember go to appropriate departments where the staff is qualified to analyze each individual situation. If remembering really is for the person's own good, they will help them remember. Here in the colony, there are many opportunities and facilities for our illiterate brothers and sisters to learn. So let's talk about that, about remembering the past. So a lot of people think, okay, when I die and pass over in my spirit, I'll remember all my past lives. Well, as Mauricio just explained, that's not necessarily true. Once you get to a certain level, then you can query through the universal cloud, universal database. You can query whatever you want once you get that level that you're that understanding. But when you're in the first levels of heaven, you are not going to be allowed to remember if it's going to hurt you. Because if you were a nice person on earth and you died and you think, oh, yeah, that's a pretty nice person. But if you're allowed to remember that you tortured people or stole or actually, killed your parents or your brother or sister in some previous life, that might be too much for you to take. And therefore, that's not going to really be allowed. But if it's something to help you recover and help you understand your present situation, just as Mauricio said, then you will be allowed to remember. So let me give you an example. In this book, a great book, Memoirs of a Suicide, Camilo Branco was an author, a writer. In fact, he was called the Balzac of Portugal in the late 1800s. He committed suicide. And he went, after he spent time in the lower zone, because suicide has to, not always, there are exceptions, but usually spend some time in the lower zone until they were scheduled to depart from the earth. He was taken in a group of his friends that were all together, like in this cave. A great book, Yvonne Piera, Memoirs of a Suicide. And they were taken to this hospital. And then they were, as one of the classes, they had to say, okay, now suicides. Why did you go through the trial you did? And also, they also told them, this is important for anybody who's depressed at this time or any other time. They said, whatever trial and tribulation that is happening to you, if you just waited a week, a month, or maybe a year, it would have changed. Because the spirit world doesn't give anybody a trial in which there is no chance of victory. Now, that victory may be a death, right? But they're not going to be tortured forever. And therefore, they went onto the stage, and each person in this group had to go and sit in this chair, and they would show them their previous lives and why they had to go through what they did. Now, for Camilo, who killed himself because he was blind, he was going blind because of syphilis. So they said, okay, now we're going to look at your past life. Why did you have to go through this trial of being blind? So what they did is they showed him, and he went all the way back first. And he was actually a spectator when Jesus walked past him carrying the cross. And he said he was just the worst, vile person. He had one withered arm. He was from Gaul. He had to leave Gaul and went to the Jerusalem, for he doesn't know why he had to leave there. And he just, hated everybody and, just was not a great person at all. And in fact, when Jesus went by him, he said he would have thrown a rock, but there were guards around, and he thought, well, the guards would have hit him if he'd thrown a rock. But what he did do is he tried to insult Mary, the mother of Jesus, this poor guy, remembering all this. And he was just not a good person. But then he said he went through life after life. And he says it was kind of always in Southern Europe. And then he had this one life where he was a very poor, but of a noble family. They had no money, but he was poor. And then he said, then he went to the priest and asked if he could learn and read, to read and write and be educated. And he said he had dreams after dream not to do that. And then he had a cousin who was very beautiful, not very rich at all, actually pretty poor. So their parents probably wanted her to marry someone who had wealth and education. And of course, he loved her, but then she actually fell in love with another person. And of course, then he hated her and wanted revenge. And so he said, okay, I'm going to go join the church because that's how I can become successful. And he said he had dream after dream of saying, don't do that. Marry a nice girl in your town, work the land, become spiritual, work on yourself. Don't go join the church so at some time you can take revenge on her and her husband to be. And this was all brought out by going through what was happening in his past lives. His father in spirit form tried to convince him, everyone in spirit form just tried to tell him, but no, he was focused. So he went to the church and then he became a member of the Spanish Inquisition. And he says, I did whatever I was told with glee. They wanted me to torture someone, I tortured. I convinced people to give them all their money, etc. Because he was a perfect fool for them. And he became powerful in that organization. And then one day he saw the woman who spurned him and her husband. And so then he would, and his husband had spent time fighting in the wars in the Netherlands and Holland during the wars of the Spanish. There's a lot of succession from the Netherlands when Spain owned the Netherlands. And of course, the Spanish Inquisition had the power to destroy anybody. So he invited them to their house, and he said he knew that they were very worried about him because he could just say one word and he would be tortured and in prison like that. But he tried to come back, and then he tried to seduce his old love. And of course, she rejected him. So then he said he found out they're going to try and escape because they knew he was going to do something. But he caught them. He took the husband and put him in jail. Of course, then the wife said, I will do anything for you. So you let my husband out. So then he made her sleep with him, do whatever he wanted. And he kept thinking that she would at some time love him. Of course, she just meekly, was passive to his aggressiveness. And he knew that, okay, we got bored with that. So he goes, okay, I'll let him go. She goes, oh, thank you. Please let him go. Because I did anything you wanted me to. But he goes, but what I didn't tell her is I wouldn't let him go whole. So what he did is he had this poor, brave soldier. He took his eyes out. He put hot pokers and blinded him. That is what he did during the time of the Spanish Inquisition. So now, what was the trial he had to go through in righting that wrong? He had to feel what it was to be blind. And how did the spirit world do that? Well, he lost his sight at an advanced age. I think he was in his 60s. And he just couldn't take that. But see how nice that lesson was? It was as if, your 5-year-old like pushed over your favorite vase, right? And you had the foresight not to be mean, said, okay, go stand in the corner, right? You didn't spank or anything like that. Go stand in a corner. Of course, that 5-year-old standing in a corner will cry and think that you are the worst person in the world because that was horrible punishment. And yet you knew as a parent that you were trying to civilize this, little bundle of love. And that's, of course, how the spirit world kind of looks at us. And it was funny about Camilo Branco says he writes just beautifully. And he says, of all my friends, they were all back in the incarnate life, but I kept holding back because I didn't want to go because I knew I had to be blind. It just scared him. And then the funny thing in the book is that Camila Branca had worked with the medium, Yvonne Piera, and then one day he was just gone. And then they had another spirit, actually, it was Leon Denis, soon after he had died. It just shows you what happens if you're a spiritist. When you die, you're put to work right away. And he helped reorganize the book and finish the book off. So that is a story of past remembrances. So it may not always be what you think it is. So let me carry on. Then he said, okay, if remembering is really for the person's own good, they help them remember. Here in the colony, there are many opportunities. So then Mauricio's talking about a learning center because there's a class for adults who passed over without having learned how to read and write. And he says you can teach this class and help them become literate while you wait for your course to start. And he said you'll teach adults only because the instructors for children and youngsters are assigned to the center and they need to be better prepared. These teachers must serve as role models to be able to solve all their students' problems. For the adults, the course is divided into subjects and you can easily teach them how to read and write. Do you want to do that? And Patricia says, yes, I do, because she's a good, wonderful person. So Mauricio said goodbye, and I went back to thinking, remembering what Dad used to say about knowledge. Knowledge, which the majority of men and spirits have as an end in itself, should be a means for one to evolve until achieving harmony with the cosmos. We don't need to know how to read to live in the material world, but it helps a lot. On the other hand, knowledge alone doesn't fulfill men, spirituality, yet it provides the conditions for true understanding and discovering bliss. So that is exactly an important, her father is so knowledgeable and so wise, I should say, because really, what is wisdom? It's the combination of knowledge and loving and caring experience and spirituality. Because knowledge by itself, you can be a horrible person and just be razor sharp and be a worse human being in the world. And I'm sure people have met people like that. But you would never call that person wise because they don't have empathy. They don't have caring, right? They have knowledge, but they don't have the other part to make them wise. And really, that's what our aim is in this life. We're not here to invent some great scientific invention or something for all of humanity. We're not here to accumulate mansions and boats and yachts. We're really here to fashion and mold our personality and character. And in molding that character, you really do want some knowledge. You want to work and study, and you want to study about spirituality. You also want to study about the world and social and culture, mathematics, whatever you want to have some knowledge. But you really want to emphasize, hopefully somewhat on par, your other side of your empathy, which I know was really hard for me. I was never very empathetic, especially for people like me who in computer science and math. You know what they say about programmers, right? And most of them, of course, introverts. And they say, an extrovert programmer is someone who looks at your shoes instead of his own shoes. So, that's my little programmer joke. So that is something that all of us have to work on all parts. And of course, that's been my major part I've had to learn since I became a spiritist, really is to increase my empathy and love for other people. So then she wrote, yes, I wanted to study to learn how to be useful wisely, and I was very happy to be able to share the little knowledge I had with other brothers and sisters. So that is her end of her of that chapter. So in essence, she's telling us, in fact, next week we will talk about the school where she goes and what she studies in. So these things about heaven, you can learn a lot more about heaven in my book, Heaven and Below, Book 1 of Spiritism, The Spirit World Revealed to an Anglican Vicar. And of course, I bring in information from all sorts of spiritual literature, from the Spirits book to books that's by Allan Kardec. Let me show that one. Oh, where'd it go? Sorry. By Allan Kardec. There we go. I would recommend, so if someone really wants to start learning about Spiritism, I would recommend first to go to my site, nwspiritism.com, and I have free on PDF is Spiritism 101, the Third Revelation. I would advise reading that. Of course, you can get it in Kindle or paperback. It's also on audio, but that may cost you something you don't want to spend. So it's free on PDF. Then if you read that and it gives you kind of a feel for Spiritism, the spirit world, then I would go back to the headwaters for Allan Kardec, who codified the Spirit's book, and look at that. Now, some people read it and it connects. That's what happened to me. And some people read it and they go, nah, I don't know. So that's why I've written other books that will expand a lot more on the Spirit's book and tell you more about Spiritism and how things go. So I've started all the way from books that just to introduce you to how reincarnation works, like The Case for Reincarnation, Your Path to Perfection. And it tells you, I bring in spiritist literature from Chico Xavier, Divaldo Franco, Allan Kardec, of course, and talk about, okay, how do you reincarnate? So I have a lot of things like that. But if you really want to understand about the spirit universe of what it's like outside, then I would recommend is Heaven and Below as one of the books you read. And of course, I have that in Kindle, audio, and paperback. And then the next book, I have a series of 3 books, is Spirit Universe. And this is where I really go into what is a spirit and what is the spirit universe. And it tells you what you do as a spirit, how you ascend, just like Patricia. Like you can tell she's at one of the lower levels, Colony San Sebastian. And she's learning and she's taking these classes. And the spirits told the Reverend G. Vaughn and other spiritist mediums much more about the spirit universe. And it revealed is that, unfortunately, some of you may not like it when you die and pass over. If you're a good spirit, you go to heaven. It's not, you don't sit on a lounge chair and strum your harp, right? And look at the clouds and the scenery. No, you learn in your work, just like Patricia is showing us in the Spiritist colony of San Sebastian above the San Sebastian city in Minas Gerais, which is a state in Brazil. And of course, there's wherever you live, there are colonies above you, and you may go there. Now, so what they say is you learn at these smaller colony levels. San Sebastian's not a big colonies. But when you go and you finish the classes that are available at that colony, you will go to a larger colony, maybe go to more classes there, but then eventually you'll go to one of the main cities on that level, and you'll go to a college and you'll learn. Now, it's not all classwork. In fact, this is what's great. Like my young daughter was complaining to me like, oh, I'm just tired of studying all this stuff. Well, you don't have to go to class. First, you don't have to take class at all. It's all voluntary. If you want to stick on your level of heaven and just roam around and explore and talk to people, you're happy to do that. You have your free will. But with the people who are in these classes and who achieve, you're working, you're part of groups. There are stories, and I talk about in Spirit Universe, of a group of spirits going down into the lower zone, helping people rise up from the lower zone and going to one of the heavens, going into towns that are managed and by a type of a mafia lord, like a warlord who cowers people and is actually physically better and bigger, I should say. And these spirits come in there and say, oh, no, okay, you can't treat these people like that anymore. And they tell the townspeople, you have a choice. You can go and take yourself to a better plane. And I have other stories that I'm going to the city of the mines and breaking out thousands of spirits. So all these things happen all the time in the spirit world. And so there's always something to do. There's people to go to help. Now, in the book by Chico Xavier, Andre Louis series of books, he is always part of different teams, and they go and they help people pass over, from death. They help them get over and go into their spirit world. They go to psychiatric hospitals and help people disentangle themselves with obsessing spirits, which can certainly happen. And so there's actually a lot of exciting work, things that you would like to do if that you love. And that's the kind of work you will have. You're not going to be assigned to work like, no, you're going to dig ditches. Well, I don't want to do that. Well, you're not going to make you do that. You will be given opportunities for something you would love to be doing, which is a wonderful gift by the spirit world for anyone. So then on my last book of that series is How We Are Guided by Spirits, which I talked about is there's how guardian angels interact with us, how prayers are answered, how whole cultures and nations are guided through what they need to be guided through, right? Even companies have spirits to decide, okay, is this company morally fit to still be in business, and it may be guided to be bankrupt, or it may be guided to continue on. Of course, all these things may take hundreds of years for you. If you think there's companies out there that aren't worth it, you may be right, but it may be on a slow transition. Because remember, and I always remember this, because one time I got my wife and I got messages in spirit. They said, okay, remember, our time is not your time. And we always think of that when we think something's going to happen, because we always think it's faster than what we think. And in fact, we laugh about the fact when Abraham's wife, Sarah, was told by one of the angels that, you're going to have a baby. And, and she laughed, right? And then I forgot how many years, it was like 10 years or whatever, 10 years after he said, then she had a baby. There was probably more than that. And therefore, so when they say something's going to happen, you don't expect it next week. It's just like, it will happen when it happens. And as they told my wife and I, our time is not your time, because of course we think, we're like a 5-year-old in a car, are we there yet? And, and of course we're not there yet. These things happen very slowly. And so I talk about that. And I also talk about what's the future. And there was a very interesting portion in this book. And it was written in a different manner. And it was written to G. Vowell. And the spirit says, okay, Reverend G. Vowell, write this down. Don't question it. And we're just, because I just put that for posterity. And it talked about the future of womanhood. And what they went through is they said, look, the culture of the world, with Christianity and let's say the Western European, because that was a time when G. Vowell heard this was early 1900. He goes, men have tried to create just states and nations by following the dictates of Christ. Of course, that hasn't worked because men are still imperfect. He goes, at some time in the future, women are going to take a more active role in the leadership. And he says, and I shouldn't say leadership because that implies telling people what they need to do. I should really say guidance, because women will guide society. He goes, right now, and I think he actually means this whole 100-year, right? Because what he said was very pertinent right now. He goes, women are learning and they're going through a phase where they want to be equal or the same as men. He says, which is something they want to be different. They want, of course, they want to be equal rights and all that, but they don't want to be as stern or dictatorial, right, as men. They want to guide by love and nurturing, and that they will at some time find that out, and they will take their place and help guide nations through their next levels. So all this is revealed and talked about, and I analyze in my book, How We Are Guided by Spirits. So these things are exciting, and that especially now, since we are beginning, as told by Spiritists, the next stage in our evolution of our planet. Now, you hear these from other spiritualists, not Spiritists, say that they can feel the harmony and the vibrations of the planet changing. And I concur with that. And in fact, what we are doing is we are modifying our vibrations of being a planet of atonement, where we are right now. That means that we go through life paying for our past mistakes, right? Because it's okay. Yeah, we got to expect that. Have a good attitude, learn from them. And it's just like a kid, right? We have to learn. And, it's actually good sometimes when a child makes a mistake so they can learn from them, from that now instead of later on when they're a young adult, and mistakes have real consequences. Same thing with us. We're learning from our mistakes. And sometimes when we make bad mistakes, it's okay. And that's why when these things happen to you, you don't like them, try not to get mad or angry or revenge against the person who instigated it. Think about that they were just an actor on the play whose job was to give you stimuli to go through some emotional anguish for you then to analyze your situation and grow from it. And I tell you, it makes a lot of difference in your stress level. So I want to thank everyone for being with me tonight. Remember, we're here every Sunday and Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern time zone in the United States. And of course, that is all around the world. And we're here on YouTube, and I also are on the Facebook group, Your Spiritual Journey. So I want to thank everyone, and I want to say God bless.